Debunction Junction, what's my function? First up.
I will tell you that I had a mother last night come up to me here in Tampa, Florida, after the debate. She told me that her little daughter took that vaccine, that injection, and she suffered from mental retardation thereafter. It can have very dangerous side effects. The mother was crying when she came up to me last night. I didn't know who she was before the debate. This is the very real concern, and people have to draw their own conclusions.
That was Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann on NBC's Today Show this morning, following up on her criticism of Texas Governor Rick Perry in last night's Republican Tea Party debate for having supported vaccination of Texas schoolgirls against a virus that causes cervical cancer. Ms. Bachmann arguing, in essence, to millions of viewers on the Today Show that vaccine causes mental retardation. Is that claim true or is that false? False. Despite Michelle Bachmann's clear implications, there is no accepted medical evidence suggesting that the vaccine she is describing causes mental retardation. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out this statement today. The American Academy of Pediatrics would like to correct false statements made in the Republican presidential campaign that HPV vaccine is dangerous and can cause mental retardation. There's absolutely no scientific validity to this statement. Since the vaccine has been introduced, more than 35 million doses have been administered, and it has an excellent safety record. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the American Academy of Family Physicians all recommend that girls receive HPV vaccine around age 11 or 12. That's because this is the age at which the vaccine produces the best immune response in the body, and because it's important to protect girls well before the onset of sexual activity. In the United States, about 6 million people, including teenagers, become infected with HPV each year, and 4,000 women die from cervical cancer. This is a life-saving vaccine that can protect girls from cervical cancer. What Michelle Bachmann was citing on the Today Show was not evidence about side effects of the HPV vaccine, but rather just an anecdote from a specific person who she heard from. In terms of drawing conclusions from that kind of anecdote, as NBC's chief science and health correspondent Robert Bazell reported today, quote, "There is no evidence of an association between this vaccine and mental problems. It's not impossible that the Bachmann story is true. Sometimes B follows A, but A didn't necessarily cause B." So that claim from Michelle Bachmann about the HPV vaccine causing mental retardation, that is false. Next up, true or false? America's embassy in Iraq dwarfs the Vatican.
There's a little embassy we built over in Baghdad. It cost us $1 billion. It's bigger than the Vatican. That's what's bankrupting this country.
As Ron Paul says, the U.S. embassy cost $1 billion and is bigger than the Vatican. Is that true or is that false? False. The price tag for building the U.S. embassy in Iraq is actually hundreds of millions of dollars shy of $1 billion, and the Vatican is, in fact, bigger than said embassy. So I'm sorry, Ron Paul, I still want you to come back on the show, but what you said about the whole Vatican embassy thing, false. During a debate, politicians screw up. Politicians get stuff wrong. That happens in every single debate, right, left, and center. But Republican debates these days are particularly fun to fact-check, not because of the one-off screw-ups like the Vatican thing and the HPV vaccine conspiracy claim this morning on the Today Show, but they're more fun to fact-check than usual because of something much more interesting than the one-off screw-up. What you're looking for in a debate in Normalsville is for a difference of opinion between two candidates on some agreed-upon set of facts. We have this problem as a nation. Candidate A wants to fix it this way. Candidate B wants to fix it this way. That's how debates in Normalsville typically work. It's even more interesting when candidate A and candidate B don't agree exactly on the same facts. Social Security is going bankrupt, one of them will say. Actually, no, another one will say. Social Security is not going bankrupt. In Normalsville, that's the kind of debate you have and that you expect. But Republicanland is not Normalsville anymore. In Republicanland, what ends up happening in debates now is that we watch candidate A, B, C, D, E, F, and G all debate on the basis of what they all agree to be facts that are not true. Things that are not actually facts at all. They all accept the same untrue premise, something they only think is true because they are Republicans. For example, Ben Bernanke.
Congresswoman Bachmann, you know that Governor Perry has suggested that Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, potentially should be tried for treason for what he's doing. Do you agree?
Well, as President of the United States, I would not be reappointing Ben Bernanke.
This is one of those issues in which the Republicans are not really debating amongst themselves. They are all in agreement that Ben Bernanke bad. The only division between them is the competition to be more vociferously against bad Ben Bernanke.
Would Ben Bernanke have a job in your administration?
No, I'd be looking for somebody new.
If this guy prints more money between now and the election, I don't know what y'all would do to him in Iowa, but we would treat him pretty ugly down in Texas.
Speaker Gingrich, Chairman of the Federal Reserve Ben Bernanke will come to the end of his term in 2014. Would you reappoint Ben Bernanke?
I would fire him tomorrow.
Why?
I think he's been the most inflationary, dangerous, and power-centered chairman of the Fed in the history of the Fed.
Ben Bernanke, the most inflationary Fed chairman of all time. This seems to be the reasoning for why they are all piling on baldy, beardy Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke has made U.S. dollars worthless, they say. It's crazy, the inflation that he's created. The most inflationary chairman of the Fed in the history of the Fed. Every time Ben Bernanke does something to stimulate the economy, it just makes more inflation. He's the most inflationary guy ever. Republican candidates seem to agree on that. Here's what inflation has looked like over the last 40 years. Under Fed Chairman Arthur Burns in the 1970s, this was inflation. It was right around 6%. At the very end of the 70s, a guy named William Miller, inflation went way up under Mr. Miller. Then for most of the 80s, we had Paul Volcker as Fed Chairman. As you can see, inflation came down under Paul Volcker. Then it was Alan Greenspan in the late 1980s until 2006. Again, inflation stayed pretty low. And now under Ben Bernanke's chairmanship, Ben Bernanke, who according to Newt Gingrich is the most inflationary Fed chairman of all time, bink. That's his inflation record. It's kind of anticlimactic, right? But again, in Normalsville, if you were assessing the inflationary prowess of the guy furthest to the right in red on this graph, he doesn't really look all that inflationary. In Normalsville, that guy does not look like your inflation problem. But in Republican land, he must be replaced. He must be fired immediately. He must even be treated ugly by an imaginary mob in the great state of Texas because of his horrible, horrible inflationary measures, as represented again by, pink, that tiny little last position on the graph. It's the same thing with the effect of economic stimulus, with the whole idea of whether government can do anything to create jobs when we have a really bad unemployment problem. It is held as an article of faith among the Republican candidates that stimulus spending to create jobs is some kind of Democratic hocus pocus. It's some sort of commie con game that they aren't going to get away with again because everybody's onto it now.
In terms of the stimulus you talked about, it was failed.
He had $800 billion worth of stimulus in the first round of stimulus. It created 0 jobs. He has proven for once and for all that government spending will not create 1 job.
You know, looked at from one angle, it is true. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the stimulus package did not create 1 job. Rather, it, quote, increased the number of people employed by between 1 million and 2.9 million people. So Rick Perry's right. It did not create 1 job. It created many millions more than that. But in Republican land, that fact, that numerical, nonpartisan truth about what real policies have done, it's not even a hypothetical. That fact does not survive the journey to Republican land. It burns up in the atmosphere on the way there. It's not even upon re-entry. It's just upon entry. The fact does not make it. At these debates, and this was the second of what's going to be 5 debates in a row now, we are seeing the way that Republicans try to win arguments with one another inside Republican land, where there is this alternate set of false facts from which they are all operating, particularly about the economy. And that is, I have to admit, that is very entertaining. And you do need to understand all of that in order to understand who the Republican Party is going to pick to be their presidential nominee this year. But in the broader context, the election's 14 months away. How do you get things done in the meantime in terms of governing? Given what the Republican presidential candidates contest is showing us about Republican land, about how Republicans talk to each other and fight with each other, how can there be any treaty of cooperation between Normalsville and Republicanland to move forward on anything. I mean, in economic terms, what the Republicans are very upset about right now, they say, is inflation. But the reality is that interest rates are right now, let me round to the nearest number, roughly, nothing. And this is what inflation looks like right now compared to our very recent history of previous Fed chairman. The idea of Republicans helping to pass a bill to create jobs in this country right now is a little bit like trying to plan the particulars of your round-the-world trip with somebody who believes the world is flat. But that is what President Obama is up against right now as he tries to push Congress to pass his jobs plan. And you can hear it in his speeches that he's not only making the case for taking an around-the-world trip, he is also having to make the case at the same time that the world is round, because apparently we are not all on board with that.
Ohio, if you pass this bill, then right here in this state, tens of thousands of construction workers will have a job again. This is one of the most common sense ideas out there. All over the country, there are roads and bridges and schools just like Fort Hays in need of repair. There is work to be done. There are workers ready to do it. So let's tell Congress, pass this bill right away.
This is just one stop in Ohio today of many on the president's nationwide trip to promote his jobs legislation. Mr. Obama will be in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina tomorrow. Today's news from the Census Bureau, however, brought